My name is Susanna Vance. I am 32 years old, and I want to tell you about the afternoon I discovered that my parents had put a deposit down on a wedding venue for a wedding I had not yet agreed to have, with a man whose proposal I had not yet answered, at a location I had never visited, in a style that reflected absolutely nothing about who I was or what I wanted. And when I confronted them about it, my mother looked at me with the specific, serene confidence of a woman who has never once considered that she might be wrong about anything, and said, "We were just being prepared, Susanna. That's all. Someone in this family has to be. Asterisk. This is the story of what happened next, and what happened before, and what happened in the middle, which is where the real story lives, not in the spectacular wrongness of the venue booking, and not in the confrontation, but in the long, complicated, beautiful, devastating country of everything that lay underneath it, the country I had been living in without a map for my entire life, and which I only began to understand once someone, not my parents, not my fiancé, not any of the people I would have expected, put a hand on my arm and said, "Look at where you are. Look at what this is. You are allowed to want something different." Asterisk, I'm going to tell you all of it, the whole shape of it, because the venue is almost the least important part. Asterisk. When I was 4 years old, my mother dressed me for my cousin's birthday party in a white dress with blue smocking and patent leather shoes, and she stood back and looked at me and said, "Asterisk, perfect. You look absolutely perfect." Asterisk, and I remember this with the specificity of a child who understood that something significant had just been communicated, feeling the weight of that word. Not as a compliment, as a requirement. Perfect. The state of being exactly right in a way that precluded deviation. I was 4 years old and I understood, in the wordless way that children understand things before they have the vocabulary for them, that I was expected to remain this way. Unchanged by the party, unchanged by the cake, unchanged by the ordinary entropy of being a small person moving through a day. My mother, Vivian Vance, was not a cruel woman. I want to establish that immediately and clearly, because what follows might make her sound like one, and the truth is more complicated and, in the end, more sad. She was a woman who loved her children with the particular ferocity of someone who had learned to love by controlling, who had come to believe that love expressed as management was the highest form of devotion, who had spent her whole life arranging things and had confused the arranging with the caring for so long that she could no longer see the difference. She was beautiful, my mother. Not in a soft way, in the architectural way, the way of structures that have been specifically designed to impress. She had the cheekbones of a woman who had always known she had them, dark hair that she kept precise at shoulder length for 30 years, and the particular posture of someone who considers slouching a moral failing. She dressed with deliberate intention every day of her life, including Saturdays, including sick days, including the day after my father's brother died, when she came downstairs in pearls and a pressed blouse and stood at the kitchen counter making breakfast with the composure of someone who had decided, somewhere in the night, that grief was not going to make her untidy. My father, Raymond Vance, was a different kind of force. Where my mother was architectural, my father was meteorological. He moved through rooms the way weather does, filling them with a particular climate, determining whether the people inside them felt warm or cold or anxious or settled. He was a large man in both physical and psychological terms, an attorney for 35 years, the kind of attorney who won cases through sheer conviction, who believed that his version of a situation was correct the way some people believe in gravity, not with effort, just with complete structural certainty. He was funny when the humor served him. He was generous, when generosity was the most effective expression of his power. He loved me in the way powerful people sometimes love their children, as evidence of their own success, which is a real love and an insufficient one. My sister Addie, 3 years older than me, currently living in Denver with her husband and 2 dogs and what I would describe as a carefully managed distance from our family of origin, had developed her coping mechanisms for our parents' particular brand of loving earlier than I did and more efficiently. By the time she left for college, she had constructed a version of herself that satisfied our parents enough to buy her freedom. She called on Sundays, she attended Christmas, she answered questions about her life in sufficient detail to forestall further inquiry, and she kept the actual substance of her living entirely to herself. I had always admired this and never quite managed it. I was too much the younger one, too much the one who still wanted something from them, too much the one who kept thinking that if I explained myself clearly enough, they would eventually understand. I had been explaining myself to my parents for 32 years. I was still doing it when I started writing this. The man in this story, the man whose proposal I had not yet accepted when my parents booked the venue, is named Theo Alderton. He is 35 years old now, 33 when this story takes place. He is a structural engineer who designs pedestrian bridges, which is a specific enough occupation that people at parties always ask him follow-up questions, and he always has interesting answers, which is a quality I found attractive early on. He has red hair that the sun has been slowly lightening since his 20s and a habit of tapping his thumbnail against his bottom lip when he's working through something, and he makes the best roast chicken I have ever eaten in my life, which he achieves through a combination of technique and the particular stubbornness of someone who spent 3 years perfecting a single recipe because he had decided it was worth perfecting. I met Theo at a mutual friend's birthday dinner in October, 3 years before the proposal. The mutual friend was a woman named Petra, not mine actually, but Addie's, who had moved back from Denver briefly for work and had brought me along to the dinner because I was in the specific early 30s phase of living alone and sometimes going a full weekend without leaving the apartment, which Addie had decided was a situation requiring intervention. Petra's boyfriend at the time knew Theo from university. We were placed next to each other at the table, which I now know was deliberate on Petra's part and which she has never fully admitted to. He was interesting and specific and quiet in a way that didn't read as reserve but as attention. He listened when other people talk the way people listen when they're actually interested. He made one very dry observation about the restaurant's wine list that made me laugh so suddenly I almost inhaled my drink, and then he looked pleased in the way people look pleased when a joke has landed exactly right. By the end of dinner I had given him my number, which I did not usually do, and by the end of the following week we had been on a first date that turned into a 5-hour conversation over dinner and a walk along the river in the October dark. And by the end of the month something had shifted in the architecture of my daily life, the specific shift of someone who has been added to the equation. I told my parents about Theo at Christmas, 3 months after meeting him. I want to be precise about this timing because it matters for what follows. I was careful in those first months to not introduce him to my parents prematurely. This was not because I wasn't serious about him. I was more quickly than I had been about anyone in recent memory. It was because I had learned, from a decade of adult relationship experience with my parents as an audience, that introducing a man to my mother and father was not a simple social event. It was an audition, with judges who had opinions, and the opinions once formed were not easily revised. My mother at Christmas dinner asked approximately 43 questions about Theo in the space of 2 hours. I know the number is approximate, but I counted at the time, in the specific way that children of overpowering parents develop a monitoring habit, tracking the questions, the implications behind them, the direction they were heading. The questions range from the practical, asterisk what does his family do, where did he go to school, does he own or rent, asterisk, to the architectural, asterisk where do you see this going, have you talked about the future, does he know what he wants, asterisk, to the philosophical, asterisk is he the kind of man who will be able to handle you, does he understand what he's getting into, asterisk. That last category, does he understand what he's getting into? As if I were a project, a significant undertaking that required specific preparation. As if the person being auditioned was not Theo but me, the version of me that my parents had been constructing and curating for 32 years, the Susanna who had to be handled correctly by the right kind of man. My father listened to my answers with the particular listening that was really just waiting for the points where he could shape the narrative. He asked Theo's age, asterisk 30, which was acceptable, asterisk, his field, asterisk engineering, which earned a nod, asterisk, and whether he came from a stable family background, asterisk I said I didn't fully know yet, having been with him for 3 months, which seemed to concern both of them in ways they managed to express simultaneously, asterisk. I went home from Christmas with the familiar specific feeling I associated with my parents, a mixture of being loved and being observed, of warmth and weight, of the particular exhaustion of a person who has spent a day performing their life for an audience that has strong opinions about the performance. Theo and I continued. Year 1 was the discovering year, the year of finding out who the other person was in ordinary and extraordinary circumstances, of testing the fit, of the accumulated dailiness of 2 people building a shared life. He met Addie in the spring and they liked each other immediately, and she texted me afterward. Asterisk he's the real thing, Seuss. I can tell. The way he looks at you. Asterisk he met my parents in the summer, at a dinner at their house in Glenview that my mother had planned with the precision of a military operation, the table setting, the menu, the seating arrangement that had Theo next to my father and me next to my mother, which I understood as an interrogation structure, a way of managing information flow. Theo navigated it with the steady, attentive quality he brought to most things. He answered my father's questions without performing. He responded to my mother's assessments of his career trajectory without getting defensive. He helped clear the table without being asked, which my mother noted and filed away in the specific way she filed things that met her standards. Afterward in the car he said, "Asterisk, your parents are a lot." Asterisk, I said. Asterisk, yes. Asterisk, he said. Asterisk, are you okay? Asterisk, I said. Asterisk, I'm always okay. I've had 30 years of practice. Asterisk, he looked at me sideways at a red light, and there was something in the look that was noticing something, paying attention to something, and I thought, he sees more than I've told him, which was fine, which was also slightly frightening. Year 2 was the settling year. The year where you stop discovering and start living, where the relationship becomes a structure you inhabit rather than a thing you're building, where you can be quiet together without filling the quiet, where you know each other's bad days and your instincts about them are mostly right. My parents had opinions about year 2. Specifically, my mother had opinions about the timeline. She asked in September of year 2 whether Theo and I had discussed the future. I said yes, in the general sense we had discussed where we wanted to be in 5 years, whether we both wanted children eventually, yes, probably. Whether we saw our lives continuing together, yes, definitely. She asked whether there had been any movement on that front. I said I didn't know what she meant by movement. She said, "Asterisk, Susanna. You know exactly what I mean." Asterisk. I did know. She meant a proposal. She meant that by her accounting, a 31-year-old woman who had been with a man for 2 years should be approaching some kind of formal confirmation of the relationship's trajectory, and the absence of that confirmation was a failure of something, of the relationship's seriousness, of Theo's intentions, of my willingness to push for what I deserved. All of that lived in the word movement. I told her we were happy. I told her we weren't in a hurry. I told her that relationships didn't have to follow a prescribed schedule, and that I was more interested in the quality of what we were building than the speed at which we were building it. She said, asterisk, "I just want you to be settled, Susanna." Asterisk. I said, asterisk, "I am settled, Mom." Asterisk. She said, asterisk, "You know what I mean." Asterisk. I did know what she meant. She meant, I want you in a category I understand and can report on. I want you in the position I have imagined for you. I want the external markers of a life I have been arranging in my head for 32 years to be in place, so that I can feel that the arrangement is complete. This was the year I first went to therapy. I want to tell you that because the therapy is important to the rest of the story, not in the way of having a dramatic revelation, but in the slow, gradual way of learning a new language, of having words given to you for things you have been experiencing without names. My therapist, whose name was Dr. Layla Osei, and who had an office with too many plants and a way of asking questions that felt less like inquiry and more like gentle excavation, described my parents in the second session as high investment. I said, asterisk, "That's a very generous framing." Asterisk. She said, asterisk, "Tell me what framing you'd use." Asterisk. I said, asterisk, "Consuming. Like they take up more space than they're entitled to. In my head, in my decisions, in my sense of myself." Asterisk. She said, asterisk, "Do you think that's accidental?" Asterisk. I thought about it. I thought about my mother in the car on the way home from my cousin's birthday party when I was 4, checking the white dress for cake stains, satisfied when she found none. I thought about my father at my high school graduation, already talking to a dean he knew about college placement before I had even come off the stage. I thought about the summer internship at my father's colleague's firm that appeared in my life the summer I was 20, arranged without consultation, presented as an opportunity while functioning as a direction. I said, asterisk, "No. I don't think it's accidental." Asterisk. Dr. Osei said, asterisk, "What do you think it is?" Asterisk. I said, asterisk, "I think they love me the only way they know how, which is by not leaving anything to chance." Asterisk. Year 3. This is where the story arrives at the thing I mentioned at the beginning, so I want to take the approach carefully, because the venue booking did not arrive in isolation. It arrived in the context of a year that had been building toward it in ways I could see only in retrospect. The year started in January with my mother sending me a link to a wedding photographer. Not captioned, not explained, just a link appearing in my messages on a Tuesday morning while I was making coffee, to a wedding photographer whose work was beautiful and whose booking calendar, the link informed me when I followed it, was filling fast. I texted back. Mom, Theo hasn't proposed. She texted back. Good photographers book 2 years out, Susanna. In February she mentioned a venue, not by name, not with specifics, just the mention casual at the end of a phone call about something else. Asterisk. I drove past that estate outside Glenview, the one on Route 41. You know the one I mean? They do weddings. Very elegant. Asterisk, I said. Asterisk, okay. Asterisk, she said. Asterisk, just keeping my eyes open. Asterisk, I let it pass the way I let many things pass, filing it in the specific mental folder I kept for my mother's particular preoccupations. In March, Theo told me he was thinking about proposing. He did not say it as an announcement. He said it the way he said things that mattered to him, quietly, with the slight formality of someone making sure the other person understood the weight of what was being said. We were in his kitchen, which was where most of our important conversations happened because that was where he was most himself, where the roast chicken was always in some stage of preparation and the radio was always on at a low volume, and he turned from the counter and looked at me and said, Asterisk, I've been thinking. About us. About what I want. Asterisk, and then he said he had been thinking about proposing, that he wanted to make sure I knew where he was, that he wasn't going to do it immediately but that he wanted us to be having the same conversation, moving in the same direction. I said, Asterisk, yes. I want that. Asterisk. He said, Asterisk, okay. Asterisk. He said it the way he said things that settled things. Simple and certain and his. I drove home that night and I sat in my apartment and I thought about what a proposal from Theo would look like. Not the ring or the location or any of the externals, but the actual thing, the conversation, the specific words he would choose and the way he would say them, probably quietly, probably in a kitchen, probably in the middle of an ordinary day when neither of us was performing anything. I thought about saying yes. About what yes would feel like, coming out of my body going toward him. Felt like the most straightforward thing in the world. I did not tell my parents. I want to be very clear about this. I knew that if I told my mother that Theo had said he was thinking about proposing, the machinery would begin moving. Months before anything had actually happened, the machinery would begin. I needed the space between his intention and his action to be mine, quiet and unhurried and not yet contaminated by my mother's certainty about how things should go. I told Addie, who was the person I told things I wasn't telling anyone else. Addie said, Asterisk, Sus. I'm so happy. He's a good one. Asterisk, I said. Asterisk, I know. Asterisk, she said. Asterisk, are you going to tell Mom? Asterisk, I said. Asterisk, not yet. Asterisk, Addie said. Asterisk, good call. Asterisk. What I did not know in March was that my parents already knew. I found this out much later, and the finding out is part of the story, so I'll hold it for a moment. What I need to tell you first is what happened in April. In April, Theo and I went to dinner at my parents' house. A regular dinner, one of the monthly ones my mother organized with the particular regularity of someone who believes in scheduled contact as a form of maintaining relationships. Theo and my father had developed, over the previous year, the kind of careful companionship that forms between two men who respect each other without necessarily understanding each other. My father asked after Theo's bridges with the slightly performative interest of a man who has decided to approve of something and is expressing that approval in the limited vocabulary available to him, and Theo answered with the genuine engagement of someone who actually loved what he did. It was functional. It was even occasionally warm. My mother over dinner mentioned a venue. Not generically. Not the vague mention from February. She said, Asterisk, I drove out to Hadley House last Saturday. The estate on Route 41. It's even more beautiful than I remembered. Asterisk. I said, Asterisk, what were you doing at a wedding venue? Asterisk. She said, Asterisk looking. Asterisk. I said carefully. Asterisk looking at what? Asterisk. She said, Asterisk just looking. Keeping up with what's available. These places book very fast, Susanna. Asterisk. I looked at Theo. He was looking at his plate with the still expression he wore when he was deciding whether to engage with something. My father was refilling his wine glass with a quality of not looking at me that I recognized as the not looking of a man who knows something is coming and has decided to be somewhere else in his mind when it arrives. I said, Asterisk, Mom. Theo and I are not engaged. Asterisk. She said, asterisk, I know that. Asterisk. I said, asterisk, so why are you looking at wedding venues? Asterisk. She said, asterisk, I'm not doing anything. I'm just making sure I know what's out there. Someone has to be organized about these things. Asterisk. I said, asterisk, no one asked you to be organized about this. Asterisk. She said, asterisk, you'll thank me later. Asterisk. This is the sentence that I want to mark, because it is the sentence my mother deployed whenever her actions were challenged, whenever the machinery exceeded its mandate, whenever the management extended past what had been invited. You'll thank me later. The sentence of someone who has decided that their vision of your life supersedes your experience of living it. The sentence that says, my certainty about what's good for you is more reliable than your uncertainty about it. And the fact that you don't want this right now is simply a failure of your own imagination. I said, asterisk, I'd like you to not do this. Asterisk. She said, asterisk, do what? Have dinner. Asterisk. I said, asterisk. You know what I mean, Mom. Asterisk. My father said, asterisk, let's all take a breath. Asterisk. Theo was very still across the table. Not absent, he was fully present. I could feel it, the particular quality of his attention. But contained. Waiting. My mother said, asterisk, I just want what's best for you, Susanna. Asterisk. I said, asterisk, I know. Asterisk. The dinner continued. The subject changed. My father made a joke that landed and the tension dispersed, the way tension always dispersed in my family's dinners. Not resolved, just deferred, pushed below the surface to continue its work invisibly. On the drive home, Theo was quiet for a while. Then he said, asterisk, does that happen a lot? Asterisk. I said, asterisk, the venue thing? No, that's new. Asterisk. He said, asterisk, not the venue thing specifically. The way she does that. Asterisk. I said, asterisk, what way? Asterisk. He said, asterisk, the way she talks about your life like she's the one living it. Asterisk. I was quiet for a moment. The specific discomfort of having something named that you have been managing by not naming it. I said, asterisk, yes. That happens a lot. Asterisk. He said. And you've always just, he stopped. Asterisk, you don't push back much. Asterisk. I said, asterisk, I've been doing it my whole life. Sometimes it's easier to deflect than to fight. Asterisk. He said, asterisk, yeah. But you're not 4 anymore. Asterisk. I looked at him sideways in the car, the thumbnail against his bottom lip, thinking. He said, asterisk, I'm not criticizing you. I'm just noticing. Asterisk. I said, asterisk, I know. Asterisk. I called Dr. Osei the next day and made an extra appointment. May arrived with the particular quality of Ohio Springs, unreliable warmth, the occasional cold day that felt like a betrayal, the smell of something opening. I was working long hours at the architecture firm where I'd been a project manager for 4 years, a job I had chosen specifically because it was mine, chosen from my own interest, applied for without my parents' help, built over 4 years through my own competence without the scaffolding of my father's connections. It was one of the things about my life I was most proud of, the quality of it being entirely self-constructed, and I was in the middle of a project I loved, a community library renovation in a town an hour outside the city that had been awarded a small arts grant and wanted something beautiful, and I was trying to give them something beautiful. Theo proposed on a Thursday evening in May. Not in a kitchen as I had imagined, or rather, not in his kitchen but mine, which was where we'd been making dinner together because it was my apartment's turn. He had brought ingredients and wine and a playlist I hadn't heard before, and we were doing the thing we did in kitchens, the thing that was the register in which we were most fully ourselves, moving around each other, handing things, the domestic choreography of 2 people who know where the other person is without looking. And at some point he turned from the counter and he said my name in a way that was different from the ordinary way he said my name, and I turned and he was holding a ring. The ring was not what my mother would have chosen. It was not an enormous diamond solitaire in a classic setting. It was an oval sapphire, not blue but a deep green blue, the color of deep water, in a low simple setting with tiny diamonds on either side. And it was unlike anything I had ever seen, and it was completely, exactly, entirely mine. Later he told me he had gone to 6 different jewelers before he found it, and that when he found it he knew immediately, and I believed him completely because that was how he worked, patient until the right thing, then entirely certain. He said, I love you. I want to marry you. And I want to know if that's what you want too. He said it simply and directly, the way he said the things that mattered most. Without speech or performance. Just the true thing stated clearly, waiting for my answer. I said yes. Obviously I said yes. I said it with my whole body, immediately and without reservation, and then I was in his arms and the ring was on my finger, and the thing that had been building for 3 years arrived at the place where it was supposed to arrive, and it felt exactly like I thought it would feel, like the most straightforward thing in the world. We stood in my kitchen for a long time. Then he said, so I should tell you something. I said, okay. He said, I talked to your parents. Before this. In March. I called your father and asked permission. I said, you asked permission? He said, I know you have complicated feelings about the tradition. I have complicated feelings about it too. But your dad, I wanted to include him. I thought it was the right thing for this family, given who your parents are. I thought it would mean something to him. I said, what did he say? He said, he said yes. He was actually quite moved. He got a little, well, you know your father. I did know my father. I could picture it, the compression in his voice when emotion arrived, the way he managed it, the way something real would have moved through him in that conversation, and he would have contained it with his characteristic method, which was to be formal about informal things. I said, my mother too? He said, she was there. He put it on speaker. I sat with that. With the fact that my parents had known since March. That the venue mentioned in April, I drove out to Hadley House, the estate on Route 41, had happened with the knowledge that a proposal was coming. With full information. With my father's blessing given and my mother's machinery already activated. I said, okay. He said, are you, is that okay? I said, I'll deal with my feelings about the tradition later. Right now I'm happy. Can I just be happy right now? He said, yes. Absolutely yes. We went back to cooking dinner and we ate it at my table with the ring catching the kitchen light and the playlist playing and the world having shifted in the specific way it shifts when something permanent has been added to it. I was happy. Genuinely, simply, completely happy. I went to sleep happy. I woke up happy with my hand looking different on the pillow, and I was still happy when I called my mother in the morning. She picked up before the first ring completed. She said, he called us last night. Theo had called my father after leaving my apartment. She said. Oh Susanna. I'm so happy for you. She sounded happy. She sounded also, I noted this, filed it, as though she were already 3 steps ahead of the moment. I said, I wanted to tell you before you heard it anywhere else. She said, I know. Of course. Tell me everything. I told her the important things, the ring. She asked for a description and I gave her one, and she said interesting in a way that meant she had expected something else. The setting, lovely, very intimate, the feeling, wonderful, mom, I'm so happy, She was warm and genuine and excited and also simultaneously somewhere else, somewhere forward-looking, and I felt the specific sensation of a person watching weather move in from the distance, knowing it's coming, not yet knowing its shape. She said, we need to talk about timing. Spring weddings book very fast. I said, mom, I've been engaged for 12 hours. She said, I know, sweetheart. I'm just saying. I said, Theo and I need to have our own conversations first, before we start talking to anyone else about logistics. She said, of course. Of course. I just want to be helpful. I said, I know. I called Addie from the car on the way to work and she screamed, the specific joyful scream of a sister who loves her sister. And then she said, oh no. Have you talked to mom yet? I said. Just now. She said, how far along is the machinery? Asterisk, I said. Asterisk. I have no idea, but I have a bad feeling. Asterisk. Addie said. Asterisk, Seuss. You need to be really clear with them right from the start. I know you hate conflict, but if you give them an inch. Asterisk. I said. Asterisk, I know. Asterisk. She said. Asterisk, I mean it. They need a firm boundary before they develop momentum. Asterisk. I said. Asterisk, I know, Addie. Asterisk. He said. Asterisk, I know. But you're going to be trying to plan a wedding in the middle of it, and I think we need a strategy. Asterisk. I loved him very much in that moment. Not just the ambient structural love of 3 years together, but the specific acute love of being seen by someone who has studied you and reached accurate conclusions. He was not catastrophizing. He was not telling me my parents were terrible. He was describing a situation with clarity and asking what we were going to do about it, which was the register he brought to every problem he took seriously, including the ones he built for pedestrians to cross rivers on. I said. Asterisk, the first call is mine to make. I need to talk to them. Asterisk. He said. Asterisk, yes. Asterisk. I said. Asterisk, but I want you there. Asterisk. He said. Asterisk, whenever you're ready. Asterisk. I was not ready the next day. I was not ready for several days, during which I talked to Dr. Osei and to Addie and to Petra, who said, with the bluntness that was her primary quality, Seuss, you have to go scorched earth on this one, or they will plan your entire wedding and also name your first child. And I thought very carefully about what I wanted to say and how I wanted to say it and what I was actually asking for. What I was asking for was not a small thing. I knew that. I had asked for versions of it for years, asked for my choices to be respected, for my timeline to be honored, for the specific boundary between my life and their management of it to be more clearly drawn. The asks had been small and incremental and mostly unsuccessful, not because my parents were malicious, but because they genuinely could not see the line. The line I kept trying to draw was a line they had been standing on since before I was born, had stood on so long they had forgotten it was there, had in fact come to believe that their standing on it was a form of love rather than a form of control. What I needed to say, I realized in Dr. Osei's office on a Thursday afternoon, was not specifically about the venue. The venue was the occasion for the conversation, but the conversation was about something much larger and much older, and if I focused only on the venue I would be doing the thing I had always done, addressing the specific instance without naming the pattern. The pattern needed to be named. The pattern was the problem. The venue was just the place where the pattern became impossible to ignore. I said to Dr. Osei, asterisk, I'm afraid that if I say the full thing, I'll lose them. Asterisk. She said. Asterisk. Tell me what losing them looks like. Asterisk. I said, asterisk, they'll think I'm rejecting them. They'll think it's an attack. My father will become formal and cold and my mother will cry and then decide I've wounded her, and then it will become about that. About her. Asterisk. She said, asterisk, that might happen. Is that a reason not to say it? Asterisk. I said, asterisk, if I say the true thing and it destroys my relationship with my parents, then I've lost something real. Asterisk. She said, asterisk, is the current relationship with your parents something that's working for you? Asterisk. I looked at the plants on her windowsill. I said, asterisk, no. Asterisk. She said, asterisk, what does a working relationship with your parents look like? Asterisk. I said, asterisk, one where I feel like a person rather than a project. Asterisk. She said, asterisk, and are you willing to ask for that? Even if the asking is uncomfortable. Asterisk. The answer, arrived at slowly and with the specific friction of something that has been avoided for a long time, was yes. I was willing. I was going to be 32 years old for the rest of my life in the sense that 32 was the year I did it. The year I stopped deflecting and started saying the true thing. I could feel it arriving like weather. Not like the weather I associated with my father, filling a room determining the climate, but something cleaner. My own. I drove to my parents' house on a Saturday morning with Theo in the passenger seat. He had said in the car, asterisk, what do you need from me? Asterisk, I said, asterisk, just be there. Don't intervene unless I ask. Let me do this. Asterisk, he said. Asterisk, okay. Asterisk, he said it the way he said things he meant entirely. My parents were in the kitchen when we arrived. My father was reading the paper, which was what he did on Saturday mornings, and my mother was at the counter with coffee, and the scene had the specific, domestic normality that made what I was about to do feel more rather than less necessary. Because this was the kitchen where I had eaten 10,000 meals. This was the table where the pattern had been laid, where the management had been conducted, where the version of me that required supervision had been constructed and maintained. The normalcy of it was not innocent. I sat down. Theo sat beside me. My father folded the paper and looked at us with the quality of attention that meant he had some advance information and was preparing himself accordingly. My mother sat across from us with her coffee and the composed expression she wore when she knew something was coming. I said, I want to talk about the venue. My mother said, Susanna. I said, let me finish. She stopped. I said, you booked a reservation at Hadley House before I had accepted Theo's proposal. You chose a venue neither of us had visited, a date neither of us was consulted about, for a wedding that at the time of the booking had not been agreed upon by the two people who would be getting married at it. And when I called to ask about this, you said you were being prepared. And I need you to understand something about that. My father said, we were trying to help. I said, Dad. Please let me finish. He looked at me. Something moved through his expression. Not anger, not defensiveness, but something more complicated. He nodded. I said, the venue is not the problem. I mean, it's a problem, we'll deal with it, we're canceling the reservation. But the venue is not the thing I need to talk about. The thing I need to talk about is a pattern that has been happening my entire life, and that I have been trying to name for years in smaller ways, and that I am now naming directly because it is my engagement and it is my wedding and it is my life, and I need you to hear me. My mother's face was doing the thing it did when she was managing emotion, the composure, the slight tightening. My father was very still. I said, you have spent my entire life making decisions about my life. Not big, dramatic decisions. I'm not saying you were cruel or abusive or anything clinical like that. I'm saying small, constant decisions. The internship when I was 20 that you arranged without asking me. The graduate program you put my application together for without telling me. The apartment in Lincoln Park that you found and pressured me to take, and that I spent 2 years in being unhappy because it was your vision of my life, not mine. These are the things I remember. There are things I don't remember because they happened before I could track them. My mother said, we were trying. I said, I know you were trying to help. I know that's what you believe. But here's what it feels like from where I'm standing. It feels like you don't trust me to make good decisions, to know what I want, to run my own life with competence. It feels like there is a version of my life that exists in your heads, the right version, the approved version, and that you are constantly steering me toward it regardless of whether it's the version I want. My father said very quietly, Susanna. I said, let me finish, Dad. Please. He was quiet. I said, I am getting married. I want to get married. I am genuinely, completely, happily going to marry Theo, and that is my choice, and I made it for my own reasons, and it is the most important decision of my adult life so far. And what I need from you, both of you, is to let this one be mine. Not mine in the sense of doing all the work while you watch. Mine in the sense of making the decisions. Choosing the venue, choosing the date, choosing what kind of day it is. I am asking you to be in it, to be present, to be part of it because I love you and I want you there. But to be in it in the way that guests are in a wedding, not the way directors are. The kitchen was quiet. My mother said, we only want what's best for you. I said, I know. And what's best for me right now is to be trusted to know what's best for me. My father looked at the table. He looked at it with the quality of a man who is processing something at depth, who is running the calculation slowly and letting it arrive rather than rushing to the answer. He said, the venue was your mother's idea. My mother said, Raymond. He said, it was. And I knew about it and I didn't say anything, which is its own thing. He looked at me. I should have said something. My mother said, I was trying to help, Raymond. You know I was trying to help. My father said, I know. And then to me, Asterisk, she was trying to help. That doesn't mean the help was right. I should have. Asterisk, he stopped, pressed his lips together. Asterisk, I should have pushed back when she called. Asterisk. My mother looked at my father with an expression I had never quite seen on her face. Not hurt, not quite. Something more disorienting, the expression of a person who is, for possibly the first time in a long time, being described accurately by someone who loves her. She said, Asterisk, I don't understand what I did wrong. I don't understand why wanting to take care of things. Asterisk. I said, Asterisk, Mom, taking care of things is not the same as taking over things. Those two things feel the same from where you're standing, but they feel completely different from where I'm standing. Asterisk. She said, Asterisk, I've always taken care of things. My whole life. It's how I... Asterisk, she stopped. And something happened then that I had not expected. Not because I hadn't seen my mother cry. I had, many times, always with the specific composure of someone who cried only when she had decided it was appropriate, and sometimes even then with control. But what happened in that kitchen was different. Something cracked. Not dramatically, not with a sound, but visibly. Something in the managed composure came apart, and what was underneath was not the calculated grief I was used to, but something older and less polished and more real. She said, Asterisk, my mother never took care of anything. Asterisk. The kitchen was very quiet. She said, Asterisk, she was not. There was no taking care of things in the house I grew up in. There was chaos and uncertainty and... Asterisk, she stopped. Started again. Asterisk, I made myself into someone who took care of things because the alternative was what I grew up in. And I swore that my children would never. Asterisk. She couldn't finish the sentence. My father put his hand over hers on the table. He did it without looking at her, in the practiced way of people who have been beside each other for a very long time. I sat across from my mother and I looked at her and I thought about the 4-year-old girl in the white dress with the patent leather shoes. And I thought about her mother, my grandmother Edith, who I had met twice before she died when I was 7 and remembered only as a person who smelled of cigarettes and sat very still, not in the watchful way but in the absent way, the way of a person who has gone somewhere inside herself and left the body in the room. I thought about the chaos my mother had named without describing, the uncertainty, the house that was not taken care of, and I thought about the specific way that wounds travel through generations, wearing different clothes, presenting different faces, but fundamentally the same wound seeking the same resolution that never quite arrives. My mother had been trying to give me the opposite of what she grew up in. She had been trying, every soup can aligned, every venue researched in advance, every opportunity arranged before it could slip through uncertain fingers. She had been trying to give me the safety she never had. The problem was that what I needed and what she needed to give me were not the same thing. And that gap between her need to provide the safety and my need to build it myself was the thing we had been living in for 32 years without being able to name it properly. I got up from the table. I went and sat beside my mother. I took her hand, the one my father wasn't holding, and I held it and I said, Asterisk, I know you were trying to give me something. I know it came from love. And I need it to be different than this. Not because I don't love you, because I do, but because the way it is now, it doesn't feel like love from where I'm standing. Feels like I'm not trusted. And I need to be trusted. Asterisk. My mother looked at me. Her eyes were wet, not composedly but genuinely. She said, Asterisk, I trust you. Asterisk. I said, Asterisk, then show me. Let me plan my own wedding. Asterisk. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, the reservation at Hadley House. I said, Asterisk, we're going to cancel it. Asterisk. She said, Asterisk, I already paid the deposit. Asterisk. I said, Asterisk, how much was the deposit? Asterisk. She said, Asterisk, $2,000. Asterisk. I said, Asterisk, we'll pay you back. Asterisk. She said, you don't have to. I said, Asterisk, Mom, we'll pay you back. That's how it needs to work. Asterisk. She looked at me for a moment. Then she nodded. Very slightly. The nod of a woman who was revising something, slowly, under protest but sincerely. My father said into the quiet, Asterisk, I'm proud of you. I want you to know that. Asterisk. I looked at him. He said, not for this, I mean yes for this, but he stopped. Asterisk. I'm proud of the person you've become, the work you do, the way you've built your life. Asterisk. He looked at Theo, who had been very still and very present for the whole of this, the exact thing I had asked him to be. Asterisk. I'm proud of the man you're marrying. Asterisk. Theo said. Asterisk. Thank you, sir. Asterisk. My father said. Asterisk. Raymond, please. Asterisk. Something shifted in the room. Not fixed, nothing was fixed, not in that morning, not in one conversation. But shifted in the way that tectonic things shift, slowly with great reluctance but genuinely moving. We had lunch. My mother made things because making things was her language and she still needed to use it, and I let her make them without saying anything about it, because some forms of love you can receive even when the full expression of them isn't quite right yet. Theo helped my father carry chairs to the back porch, where we ate in the May warmth, and I watched my father say something to Theo that made Theo nod with that attentive, serious nod he had when something mattered to him. Afterward in the car, I asked Theo what my father had said. He said, Asterisk. He said he'd been thinking about what you said, about the pattern. And he said he thought you were right and he didn't quite know how to say that to you yet, but he wanted me to know he was hearing it. Asterisk. I said, Asterisk. My father said that? Asterisk. Theo said, Asterisk. He said he'd been trying to give you the best things and hadn't realized that the way he was giving them meant you couldn't really receive them, and that he wanted to do better. He paused. He said it in about 6 words and then changed the subject immediately, because that's your dad, but the words were genuine. Asterisk. I sat with that. The 6 genuine words. My father, in his compressed and insufficient and real way, having heard something and tried to hold it. I cried in the car. Not dramatically, quietly, in the way I was learning to cry about things that had been held a long time and were finally moving, which was different from the sharp grief of immediate things and more like the slow release of something that had been held at tension for years and was finally, partially, carefully releasing. Theo held my hand on the gear shift. I said, Asterisk. We need to go find a venue. Asterisk. He said, Asterisk. Yeah, we do. Asterisk. I said, Asterisk. Something that's actually ours. Asterisk. He said, Asterisk. Yes. Asterisk. We spent the next 3 months finding the venue. I want to tell you about this because the search was its own story, its own education, its own slowly arriving thing. We looked at 12 places. Some were beautiful and wrong, too grand, too formal, too much the version of a wedding that existed in someone else's imagination. Some were modest and wrong in different ways. Some were just wrong for reasons I could feel before I could articulate. The place we found was not a traditional wedding venue. It was a working farm an hour outside the city, with an old barn that had been converted with specific, careful attention, good light, good bones, the smell of wood and old grain that had been overlaid with a recent thorough renovation but not eliminated. There was a field behind it and an orchard to one side and a kitchen large enough for the caterer we'd chosen, and the whole thing, when we walked through it on a Tuesday afternoon in late July, felt like something we'd been looking for without knowing exactly what it looked like. Theo stood in the middle of the barn and looked up at the ceiling, the structural instinct always, and then looked at me and said, Asterisk. The bones are really good. Asterisk. I said, Asterisk. Yeah. Asterisk. He said, Asterisk. I like it. Asterisk. I said, Asterisk. I love it. Asterisk. We booked it that week. The date we chose was the first Saturday of October, 14 months away. We put down the deposit ourselves with our own money, and the receipt of the confirmation email arrived in my inbox with the specific feeling of something that had been chosen without anyone else's hand on the wheel. I called my mother to tell her. She said, Asterisk. What's it called? Asterisk. I said, Asterisk. Whitfield Farm. Asterisk. She was quiet for a moment. I waited for it. The assessment, the comparison to Hadley House, the gentle rerouting toward the vision she had been holding. She said, Asterisk. Tell me about it. Asterisk. I did. I described it, the barn, the field, the orchard, the light in the afternoon, the way the bones of it felt solid. I described it the way I describe buildings I loved, in architectural terms, in terms of material and space and the relationship between inside and outside. And as I talked, I felt my mother listening in a way that was different from how she usually listened, which was with the filter of her own vision running constantly. She was actually hearing it. She said, Asterisk. It sounds beautiful. Asterisk. I said, Asterisk. It is. Asterisk. She said, asterisk. I'm glad you found something that fits. Asterisk. The pause after that was mine, and in it I felt something I had not often felt in conversations with my mother, the feeling of having been accepted rather than managed. I said, asterisk, would you like to come see it? Asterisk. She said, asterisk, I would very much like that. Asterisk. We drove out to Whitfield Farm on a Saturday in August, Theo and me and my parents, my mother in the passenger seat of my father's car following us down the county road, the August fields on either side of us going golden in the morning. My mother walked through the barn with the particular quality of attention she brought to spaces she was evaluating, running one hand along the reclaimed wood of the beam near the entrance, looking up at the ceiling the way Theo had looked, checking the light from the high windows. She stood in the middle of the barn for a moment. My father stood beside her. He put his hand on her back in the easy, practiced way he had, and she leaned slightly into it without seeming to notice she was doing it. She said, asterisk, the light is extraordinary. Asterisk. I said, asterisk, I know. Asterisk. She turned and looked at me, and then she did something I had not expected, which was to step forward and put her arms around me in the way she hugged me when I was small fully, without the composed management of an adult embrace. She held me in the middle of that barn and she said into my hair, asterisk, I'm sorry. For the venue. For the pattern. I'm working on it. Asterisk. I said, asterisk, I know. She said, asterisk. I love you so much I don't know how to leave room for you to be yourself. I'm going to try to figure that out. Asterisk. I held my mother in the barn at Whitfield Farm on an August morning and I thought about the white dress with the blue smocking and the patent leather shoes and the word perfect and what it had meant and what it had cost and what it was possible to put down and what remained. I thought about her mother, the absent grandmother with the cigarettes and the stillness, and the specific way that unhealed wounds dress themselves in different clothes across generations and walk around doing damage without knowing what they are. I thought about the therapy I had been doing for a year and what it had given me, which was not a resolution but a map, a way of seeing the country I was standing in, of naming the features of it, of knowing which direction was forward. I thought about Theo in the passenger seat of my car on the drive out here, telling me about my father's 6 genuine words, about the small attempt at acknowledgement that was exactly as much as my father was capable of and was also, given who he was and how far he was traveling, enough. I thought about Addie in Denver, holding her careful managed distance, who had texted me that morning. Asterisk, thinking about you today, Seuss. You've got this. Asterisk. I thought about Dr. Osei and her office full of plants and the slow, careful excavation of a life that had been managed by other people for long enough that I had lost track of where I was in it, and who was steering and what I actually wanted. I wanted this. The barn, the light, the orchard, October. I wanted Theo in the middle of it saying the simple true thing. I wanted my parents in the room, loving me in the imperfect way they were capable of and learning, slowly and with difficulty, a more spacious version of it. I wanted Addie flying in from Denver in the fall, smelling of the mountains, making the specific face she made when she was happy and not performing it. I wanted the version of the day that was mine. The wedding was on the first Saturday of October, 14 months after the engagement, on a day that was exactly the kind of October day that Ohio does when it's doing it right, cold and clear. The sky the specific blue that only shows up in autumn when the humidity finally drops, the orchard at Whitfield Farm doing the thing October orchards do with the light. I am not going to describe the whole day because the whole day was mine and some of it I am keeping, but I want to tell you a few things that happened. My mother did not arrange anything without asking. She called 4 times in the planning process with suggestions, each time framed as a question, each time accepting my answer without counter-argument. The 4th time she called she said, asterisk, I found a florist who does something extraordinary with dahlias. Do you want me to send you the link? Asterisk, I said, asterisk, yes please, I'd love to see it. Asterisk, she sent the link. I looked at it. I called the florist. The flowers at the wedding were extraordinary, and they were extraordinary because my mother found the florist and I called her and we chose them together, in the specific collaboration of 2 people who have negotiated the terms of their working relationship and have arrived at something that functions. My father walked me down the aisle. He did it with the compressed, inarticulate emotion that was his signature mode. And when we reached the point where he was supposed to step away, he held my hand for a moment longer than necessary and he looked at me with the look he had that he used for the truest things, the look that didn't have words attached to it, and then he let go. Theo was at the end of the aisle. He was wearing a dark suit and the autumn light was behind him and he looked like himself, which is the only description that matters. He looked exactly like the person he was, the attentive, quiet, specific person who had made me dinner in kitchens and talked about bridges and listened when I needed to be heard and noticed the things that needed noticing and was honest about them in the careful, direct way that was his only mode. The ceremony was small. 41 people. The barn held them perfectly. The bones were good, as promised. The light was exactly what I had known it would be. Theo's sister Cora flew in from Edinburgh and cried twice and apologized for crying twice, which Theo had told me she would do, and she was exactly as I'd remembered her, warm and specific and uncontainable. Addie stood next to me. She had flown in from Denver on Thursday, arriving at my apartment with a bag and a bottle of wine and the specific quality she had of making any room feel more inhabited. And on the morning of the wedding she helped me with the thing that needed helping and stayed quiet about the things that didn't need anything and held my hand in the car on the way to the farm. During the reception I saw my mother and Theo's mother. Theo's mother, Diane, a woman from Connecticut who made birdhouses as a hobby and had an extremely dry sense of humor, standing together at the edge of the field with glasses of wine talking. Not performing. Actually talking, in the way of two people who have found a frequency. My mother was describing something with her hands, the specific gesture she made when she was explaining something architectural, and Diane was leaning in with genuine interest. I watched my mother being herself with someone who had no history with her, no expectation of management, no role in her constructed arrangements. I watched her be interesting and attentive and genuinely engaged, and I thought, there she is. There is the person she is when she's not afraid that things will fall apart without her holding them together. There is the person she could have been more of the time, if the wound had been treated and not just compensated for. I did not go over to them. I watched from a distance with the specific complicated love of a daughter who is still learning to see her mother clearly, and has decided that clearly is better than simply, even when clearly is harder. My father and Theo were at the bar together. My father was telling some story. I could tell from the gestural quality of it, the particular way he told things he thought were worth telling. Theo was listening with his thumbnail against his bottom lip, which was the listening posture, and then he laughed, the sudden real laugh, and my father looked pleased in the contained way he looked pleased, and something about the two of them in the October light, my father and the man I had married, was so complete and so right that I had to look away for a moment. Later in the evening, much later, when the light had gone low and warm and the dancing had moved to the kind of dancing that happens late in good parties, my mother found me near the orchard. She said, asterisk, I want to tell you something. Asterisk. I said, asterisk, okay. Asterisk. She said, asterisk, Hadley House would have been wrong. I know that now. I've known it since August, since I saw this place. Hadley House was right for the wedding I had in my head. This is right for the wedding you actually are. Asterisk, she paused. Asterisk. I want you to know I understand the difference. I'm still learning to live inside the difference, but I understand it. Asterisk. I said, asterisk, that means a lot. Asterisk. She said, asterisk, you were right to push back. You were right to fight for this. Asterisk, she looked at the barn, the lit windows, the people moving inside. Asterisk, it's beautiful, Susanna. It's really genuinely beautiful. Asterisk. I said, asterisk, thank you for the dahlias. Asterisk. She smiled. Not the managed smile, the real one, the one that reached. Asterisk, they were perfect, weren't they? Asterisk. I said, asterisk, they really were. Asterisk. The night ended the way good nights end. Gradually, with the specific warmth of people who have been present together for hours and are reluctant to stop. Theo and I stood at the door of the barn in the late October dark, watching people leave, saying the words you say at the end of a wedding, thank you, we're so glad you came. And somewhere in the middle of the leaving I turned to look at him and he was already looking at me, and his face in the barn light was doing the thing it did when he was not performing anything, when he was simply where he was. I said, asterisk, okay. Asterisk. He said, asterisk, so okay. Asterisk. I said, asterisk, the bones were really good. Asterisk. He said, asterisk, I told you. Asterisk. We drove home at midnight, just the two of us, the October fields dark on either side of the car, the headlights making a tunnel ahead of us, and I thought about all the things that had to happen for this particular drive to exist. The proposal in the kitchen. The venue that had been booked without me and the conversation that had followed and the barn in August and the dahlias in my mother's hands describing something to Diane at the edge of the field and my father's compressed genuine pride and Addie flying in from Denver and Theo's thumbnail against his lip and Dr. Osei's office and the white dress with the blue smocking and the word perfect and everything it had taken to get from there to here. I thought about my mother's voice saying I'm working on it in the barn in August. The specific, hard, genuine admission of someone who has been shown a mirror and has decided, after a long time, to look at what's in it. The working on it was real. I knew it was real because I had watched it over 14 months of planning, the phone calls framed as questions, the suggestions offered and accepted when accepted and released when not, the gradual, difficult learning of a different way of loving. It was not complete. These things are not complete in 1 year or one conversation or one wedding. My mother and I were still learning how to be in a room together in the right way. Still occasionally falling into the old grooves, still occasionally having to redirect. My father was still my father, still compressed and insufficient and genuine, still the meteorological force that determined the climate of the rooms he entered. These were not simple people who had simple changes, but they were trying. And the trying was real, which was more than I had known to ask for when I was 22 or 25 or even 30. The trying was the thing. The small, daily, effortful choosing of a different way. I am 32 years old. I have been married for 4 months. I am working on the community library renovation that I love, in the building with the good bones and the arts grant in the town that wants something beautiful, and I am trying to give them something beautiful. Theo is working on a pedestrian bridge over a river in a city I have visited once and will visit again when the bridge is done, because he wants to show it to me and because I want to see a thing he built. We are in our apartment, mine from when I was single, which we moved him into and which is now ours. And the kitchen is where most things happen, the way kitchens are where things happen. My parents come for dinner sometimes. My mother brings things because bringing things is her language, and I receive them without commentary because receiving love in the language it comes in is also something I am learning. My father and Theo have a relationship that is its own thing. I don't entirely know what they talk about when they talk, but I know they talk, and I know my father finds Theo's bridges interesting in a way that is genuine rather than performed. And I know Theo finds my father interesting in the specific way he found things interesting, quietly with close attention. Addie calls on Sundays. We talk about everything. We talk about Denver and the dogs and her carefully managed distance and the specific ways that a childhood like ours shapes a person, and what you do with the shaping. We talk about our parents. We talk about what it cost and what remains and what is possible and what you do with the possible. I am still in therapy. Dr. Osei's plants are thriving. I have learned, in the 2 years since I started going, that the work of understanding your own life is not something you finish, it's something you continue the way you continue anything that matters, with the specific, ongoing investment of a person who has decided that the understanding is worth the cost of getting it. Here is what I want to say at the end of this. My parents booked a venue for my wedding before I had accepted the proposal. They called it being prepared. What it was, underneath the being prepared, was a wound so old it had become invisible. A mother who grew up in chaos trying to give her daughter the opposite of chaos, not understanding that control imposed from the outside is not the same as security built from the inside. Not understanding that the thing she was most trying to protect me from, the uncertainty, the ground shifting, the thing being different than expected, was the thing I needed to be allowed to experience in order to become the person I actually was. I needed to choose my own venue. Not because Hadley House would have been wrong and Whitfield Farm was right, although both of those things were true. But because the choosing was the thing. The choosing was how you knew the life was yours. My mother is learning at 64 to give her daughter the room to choose. It is hard and she is not always successful, and sometimes she slips and sometimes I have to redirect and sometimes I have to call Addie afterward and say, you're not going to believe what she did, and Addie says, oh no, and we talk it through and we laugh about it. Eventually the specific laughter of people who love their family and know their family and have decided that the love is worth the knowing. My father said 6 words to my husband that were the closest he could come to saying what he needed to say. 6 words in the language available to him, which was not a large language for emotional things but was a sincere one. Some people love you the only way they know how. And the only way they know how is limited and insufficient and shaped by things that happened before you arrived and that you had no part in. And the gift, the specific, hard, ongoing gift, is learning to receive the love that is real within the form that is wrong. Learning to say, this part one can take. This part one need you to change. This part one forgive because I understand where it came from. This part I'm still working on forgiving, which is different from not forgiving. I'm still working on some of it. I expect I will be for a while. The barn at Whitfield Farm in October. With the good bones and the dahlias and the orchard and the light. That was mine. The roast chicken in the kitchen on a Thursday evening where someone said I love you and I want to marry you and I want to know if that's what you want too. That was mine. The conversation at my parents' kitchen table where I said the true thing with my whole chest for the first time. That was mine. This is mine too. The writing of it down. The deciding to say it all, the good and the hard and the complicated, without managing it into something simpler or more flattering or less true. My name is Susanna Vance, now Susanna Vance Alderton, which I kept both because I wanted both. I am 32 years old. I have been figuring out my own life with increasing success for some years now. I am still at it. Asterisk posted to r/true off my chest. Thank you for reading all of this. I know it's long. Some things need the length. Asterisk. Asterisk to anyone who recognizes the pattern I described. The love that feels like management, the help that crowds out the choosing, you're allowed to name it. You're allowed to ask for something different. The asking is terrifying and it's also the only way through. Asterisk. Asterisk to anyone whose parents are grieving an approach that isn't working anymore. They can learn. Not all of them, but some of them can. It takes time and honesty and the specific patience of a person who has decided that the relationship is worth the work of renegotiating it. Asterisk. Asterisk and to anyone planning a wedding. Find the place with the good bones and the right light. The bones matter more than the name. Asterisk. Susanna. Edit asterisk my mother sent me flowers today. Dahlias. No occasion. Just because. I'm keeping them on the kitchen table. Edit 2 asterisk several people have asked whether my parents and I are okay now. The honest answer, we are better, and better is not the same as okay. And I have stopped requiring okay when better is the actual truth. Better is real. Better is something. Better is worth saying. Edit 3 asterisk Theo read this and said, and I am quoting directly, asterisk, I think you got me right. Asterisk that's the highest compliment I know how to receive.